Hello and welcome back to Coven, Season 2, Episode 5, a podcast where we cultivate our dream Coven roster, bringing to light the lost stories of enigmatic people throughout history whose fascinating lives echo the complex archetype of the witch.
Hi.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good. Excited to be back.
Me too.
Been a crazy week.
Yes.
To say the least. We're coming to you from January 10th. So this week, some crazy fires broke out in Los Angeles, and that's been really tragic and chaotic. But
yeah, and ice showed up in Bakersfield, La Migra, which is also tragic to me.
definitely tragic.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard of this, which is crazy. So
It's kind of infuriating.
yeah.
Not to get political, but it's just how I am.
Sorry. Yeah, that's crazy. Okay, so tragic week all
Yeah.
around. It's also wild because I know in Nashville there's like 6 inches of snow on the ground.
Wow.
So it's like half the country, and like I think Texas is having a crazy ice storm too. So it's like
Really?
half the country is frozen and the other half is burning, and inaugurations around the corner.
But climate change doesn't exist.
Right. It's just natural. It's just the natural order of things. This is how it is every year. Don't you remember?
Yeah.
Fun times we're living in.
Yeah. That's why I look forward to this. It's a little break from reality.
True. Reshaping reality.
Yes.
Little fight towards a new one. Well, magic moment, I guess.
Yeah. What's your magic moment?
My magic moment this week is, so I went home for the holidays, and it was lovely to see my family, and my parents have been trying to sell their house in Texas to move in onto my sister's property. My sister has a farm out there, and my parents were struggling to sell their house. It's like a really niche. My dad has MS, so he's.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't know if I told
No,
you
I didn't know that.
Yeah, my dad has had MS my whole life, but he's wheelchair bound. My mom's his caretaker.
Oh.
And so their house is pretty like wheelchair. They've updated throughout the years to make it pretty handicap accessible. Anyway, I digress. It's a niche house to try to sell. And they were struggling. It's been on the market since August. And so its plans to build, update my sister's property have been halted because we need to sell that first.
Yeah.
So they've kind of just been in this really uncomfortable position in my sister's living room. But when I went back for Christmas, I left my little Mary Magdalene figurine on accident.
Oh.
And
how did you get it?
It might have nothing to do with this, but when I left her, my mom called me the day after I left, and they sold their house.
Oh.
So is it a coincidence, or was it Mary? And then she sent me Mary back, and we're back together again. I like to think that Mary had something to do with it. So
I might need to borrow Mary for some things.
Because I always like keep tabs on her. I always make sure I know where she is.
Yeah. You bring her, you pretty much have, I mean, I don't think I've ever hung out with you without Mary.
Without Mary there.
Yeah. Even
like
on a retreat.
I like to bring her. Yeah, so I think Mary helped my parents sell their house, and I'm super excited for them.
That's awesome.
Start this new chapter.
That's a great moment. Yeah.
All right. So should we
Yeah, I'm ready.
get into it? So this is the part of the show, if you're just joining us now. Coco doesn't know who I've researched and who I'm welcoming into our coven. I am going to give Coco their birth chart, their natal chart, and she's going to give a blind reading about who she thinks this person is. So
It's always the nerve-wracking part.
the best part, the most fun part.
Yeah.
A little complicated with this one. So
Okay.
I couldn't decide. I don't have a birth time, and I couldn't decide between two.
Okay.
So I have two
Oh,
for you
okay.
to look at.
Okay.
I feel pretty good that it's one of them.
Okay.
We're torn between Pisces rising and Gemini rising.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, feel
Ooh,
free.
wow. Okay, let's see here. Gemini, my goodness. Okay, so Pluto, Neptune, Jupiter, and Venus, all in Gemini. Pluto and Neptune almost conjunct, Jupiter and Venus almost conjunct. That is very, very interesting. So, transformation, spiritual, um, art, um, communication. Maybe somebody who is a writer, a speaker, um, and then Sun and Mercury. Oh wow, right next to each other. Well, one they're conjunct in Cancer, and then the other one is Cancer and Leo. Um, so, and then okay, so there's something that has to do with writing or communication of some kind, or maybe speaking, speaking in public, maybe. Um, um, as service to others and how they make their living also as well, or
It's fun with both of the charts. You're like
yeah. Well,
going back and forth. You're spot on so
okay,
far.
okay,
So,
cool. And then also this is very interesting. So psychic abilities or spiritual, something that has to do with spirituality. Um, again, in front of people, like standing in front or being in front of people, because of the reason I say that is, well, two reasons. One, because Pisces in the 10th house. Sorry, the moon in the 10th house in Pisces, and the midheaven in the 10th house in Pisces on one of the charts, and then on the other chart, it's their rising. So this maybe possibly they have a really good memory as well.
oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Wait, what is the memory? Are you associating
Moon
that with?
moon in the first house.
Oh,
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Start asking people who have their
Yeah,
moon
I'm
in
going
the first
to.
house. My husband has his moon in the first house, and
Huh. Great
he's
memory.
very. It's unfortunately he has the best memory ever. He remembers everything.
That's so interesting.
um,
That makes sense.
yeah, and then oh, sorry.
Oh,
What
I
were
was
you gonna
gonna
say?
say I think the main things that were hard for me to decide was in this chart, the Gemini rising chart, um, it puts her moon exactly opposite Chiron in Virgo,
So I was actually gonna say that there's something with Chiron as well. Yeah.
as opposed to the Pisces rising. It makes her born later in the day, and so her moon is much further along. So it's not that exact moon Chiron opposition, but
Yeah.
it makes her moon exactly conjunct,
Her north
or
node.
not exactly, but pretty close conjunct
Yeah.
her north node, and
Yeah.
that's not the case in this chart.
I
So,
see.
and
I
I
see.
think both
Yeah.
make sense.
Well, and then also I'm looking at this Mars Saturn opposition. Um, is there? I mean, Mars Saturn is one time. Okay, I think if I remember correctly, when COVID happened, there was a Mars Saturn conjunction, and I really liked the way that they described it. Chris Brennan and Austin Coppock, they were talking about it, like like COVID and us being on lockdown was a perfect example of Mars and Saturn, because it was like everything came to a screeching halt. I don't know. I thought that was really cool and
Yeah,
interesting. So
yeah,
something. So whenever I see like Mars and Saturn, I always think of like
like
COVID and
aggressive
everything.
block.
Yeah, aggressive stop,
Yeah.
or yeah,
Huh.
and then also the Uranus in the ninth house in Scorpio, in this on this one, but then also Uranus in just Uranus in Scorpio. So any, I mean, whenever I think Uranus in Scorpio, I think, well, when I think of Scorpio, I think of like holding their cards close to their chest, not really revealing too much, making sure that they can see everything before they make a move. But when it's with Uranus, it's like, because Uranus is surprise, right? And kind of like chaos and disruption, but for freedom. And so, yeah, there's that too. But I should have said something about Chiron right away, because that was actually one of the first things that my eyes were drawn to. And then Sun in either Cancer or Leo.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I stand by either or, actually.
Okay. So being in the spotlight, and then also being like, well, Cancer, either like spiritual or Cancer also is like protective and family oriented and nurturing and caring and kind, but they also will stop speaking to you if you screw them over. But yeah. So yeah. And then I'm also just kind of like looking at some of the transits too, like the, or sorry, some of the aspects I should say, like here, the moon, sun trine. So, a good balance of, if this is accurate. And then, let's see. And then in this one, there's like a trine between, Neptune and Saturn.
Well, that would be in both of them. The Neptune.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
in different places. And
yeah, I just wasn't seeing the moon
Right.
one on this one. So I just kind of was drawn to, Saturn, Neptune. Wait, where was I seeing that one? Saturn, Neptune. Oh yeah, it's a trine, right? So it's like, if there's a square, it's kind of like, I just literally read about Saturn Neptune square and how it's kind of like hesitant and not very confident. But if it's a trine, I would imagine that it would be the opposite. So yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Who is it?
Amazing. I'm gonna leave these here.
Where is it?
So you will get.
Oh,
to
okay.
that.
Sorry, I can't help
We'll
myself.
Get to that.
I just saw like Oatla de Jimenez. Oh, I'm excited. Okay.
Okay, so today I'm welcoming in the incredibly powerful, influential, and often overlooked Mazatec sabia, medicine woman, shaman, oral poet, and mystic María Sabina into our coven.
Oh, okay. I've heard of María Sabina, but I don't know much about her.
Amazing. Well, her story is intense, incredible, and extremely tragic. So buckle up.
All right.
Yeah, I guess you can go ahead and take. Well, it doesn't matter. We can leave them covered.
Okay.
I am going to leave these here so that we can kind of reference both of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to preface, I got some information. I got this suggested by one of our professors at CIS, who focuses on indigenous Chicane and Taoist philosophy.
I know exactly who you're talking about.
Dr. Saralisa Ansaldúa.
Yes.
Who remarked that Maria's true story has yet to be told in English. Because while there's a lot of information about her, and there's a lot of information about the tragedies too, there's not a lot that doesn't romanticize the story in some way. And it really leaves out the complexities of the power dynamics and the sexism and the racism and just to what extent she was exploited and abused, really.
Interesting.
And then also a classmate in our program who Saralisa suggested I talk to said similar things. Estrella.
Oh, Estrella.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Estrella Gonzalez, whose studies are also focused on indigenous cosmologies and spirituality, said that there's no solid resources from people who share her cultural identity. So I did the best I could.
Muchísimas gracias a las dos.
It's true. I did the best I could. And I think I have a lot of information, and there's definitely a good bit out there. And they gave me a couple resources that seemed
Credible.
that seemed to be good. So without further ado, let's talk about Maria.
Okay.
So Maria was born July 22nd, 1894, not 1984.
I'm all, wait, is she still with us?
She is not with us. 1894, as María Sabina Magdalena Garcia, or known as María Sabina Sabia. She was a Mazatec sabia. Sabia?
Can I
Sabia.
see the word?
Yeah.
Okay. Maria Sabina Sabia. It probably, yeah. If it was Sabia, there would be correct. A little mark over the I.
Sabia. Yeah. Mazatec sabia, who lived in the remote mountains of the Sierra Mazatec area in the Huautla de Jimenez, in the Mexican state of Oaxaca. Am I pronouncing this correctly?
Yeah,
okay.
You're doing a great job.
Okay. So she was part of the indigenous Mazatec community. Because of this, she didn't speak Spanish, let alone English.
She spoke the indigenous languages?
Mazatec, and I think it's called Mazatec. And she also didn't know how to read or write. And so this is part of the reason why it's so hard to get her story, because while there's an autobiography, it's somebody like wrote down her speaking her story, but then translated it to Spanish and then translated it to English. So it's hard to get really a feel for her personality.
Right.
There's plenty of documentaries and videos, but all of the documentaries are in Spanish too. So without captions, like without translation, which is interesting because she's such a prominent figure. So that's part of the reason why it was hard for me to pick a rising sign, because I felt like I couldn't really get a feel for her personality.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And also why I'm like, she could totally be a Leo or a Cancer. Also, not just because of the language barrier, but I think because of the cultural disconnect, just the way an indigenous Mazatec person would express themselves is going to be different from...
It's really difficult to get across. I'm always translating songs in Spanish for my husband Chris, because we listen to a lot of music from a lot of Mexican music, and the words are so poetic sounding in Spanish, and so to try to translate it into English, it loses the magic. And so I would imagine translating from an indigenous language into Spanish into English, it would be hard to capture. Yeah.
I think that
with most languages, actually, that's something else that we talked about too. One of my papers, I had to write about Goethe, and everybody that I saw and read said that if you don't speak German, it's really hard to capture how beautiful he writes and what an amazing writer he is. So I think that's just like language in general.
Yeah, language can be really inhibiting in that way, I think.
We should just get rid of it. No, just
So
kidding.
true. Find the universal language.
Yeah.
Isn't that? So that was, that's like our whole preface of just what we're working with, where she's from. She grew up with a lot of tragedy and a lot of poverty. So she witnessed her father, I don't think she witnessed, but her father died when she was 3. And this left her mother widowed at 20 years old with 2 children. She came from a long family of wise ones, which is what they called people who worked with mushrooms.
Nice.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I guess I should also preface, I didn't say that, but what she is known for is the mother of magic mushrooms, is what Americans call her, the mother of magic mushrooms.
That's amazing.
So she is the reason why we have mushrooms.
I love her.
Psilocybin.
Thank you.
It's a much more complicated story, but she is the reason. And so the wise ones are, what the people who use this plant medicine were called, and who could connect and have this gift. And so she comes from a long line of this, and her first time witnessing this, the use of this was when she was witnessing her sick uncle being cured by a wise one. And it was an incredible experience. They call the mushrooms the saint children, or little saints, because as we're familiar with, I guess, in like different cosmologies around the world and in ancient cosmologies, but also in indigenous cosmologies even today, everything is enchanted. Everything is alive. There is no us and them. It's like everything has a spirit and a soul.
The rocks are alive. The mountains are alive. The earth is alive. Everything is alive. Yes.
And so because of this, it's not like they would just like use the mushrooms. They're like actually working with the mushrooms, which to them are these little saints, these saint children. Yes. At least you already are so familiar with so much of this. So she said in her autobiography, in referencing the ceremony with her uncle, she's referencing the wise one who's healing her uncle. And she says, later, in complete darkness, he talked, and talked. His language was very pretty. It pleased me. At times, the wise man sang, and sang. I didn't understand his words, but I liked them. It was a different language from what we speak in the daytime. It was a language that without my comprehending, it attracted me. It was a language that spoke of stars, animals, and other things unknown to me. So she's just totally entranced. Isn't it?
I love it, yes.
And she's 7 years old.
Wow.
When she witnesses this.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
So, and we'll get into this more, but I think that all of the Gemini in her chart is extremely important because language becomes her gift. This is what she perceives as the way that she heals is through language. And the gift from the mushrooms is the languge. Oh. And that's like the healing powers in the language.
Wow.
So
interesting. I've never thought of psilocybin like in that regard. I've always thought of it as like kind of like a private thing that you go through. But yeah,
giving the gift of healing through words makes sense.
Yeah.
And I also just think it's so wonderful because she didn't know how to read or write. And yet her power was through words. I think it's really cool. Magical. Yeah. So after this, the Los Niños Santos became friends of hers. She and her sister they grew naturally in the Sierra Mazatec, the mountains where they live. So it's not like you have to like.
Honey, can we move there?
It's not like you have to like go and and find them and, be sneaky about it. They're just growing in abundance. So she and her little sister began eating the mushrooms after that. By the time, from the time
old were
she's
they?
7 years old.
Wow.
Her sister's younger.
Amazing.
And she, in the autobiography, there's stories of her. She talks about how they would just be laughing or crying and like stuck on the floor, and the parents would just come and scoop them up, and they never got reprimanded because the mushrooms were like sacred and respected. And they also knew that by reprimanding somebody in the state, it would just cause more anxiety and harm and damage their relationship with them. Something that's interesting too that I'm not going to focus on a ton, but it's just interesting, and I don't think it's focused on in... Actually, you know what? I'm going to save this.
Okay.
We're going to talk about that a little bit later.
Okay.
So I'm just going to continue talking about her life. Okay. At 14, she's given away to be married, which is typical for the time and the culture. Still not great. She didn't really want to. But she's married at 14 to a 20-year-old. And she ends up falling in love with him, but he isn't super faithful. He definitely brings a lot of women home. And in her autobiography, she's expresses that she loves him, but it wasn't like the happiest situation. Yeah. And he ends up fighting in the Mexican Revolution and dies after coming home 6 years later. So she's kind of mirroring her mother's story. She has 3 kids at this point. She's 20 years old and widowed.
Wow.
Yeah. So already 20 years old, 3 children. She
Mm-hmm.
has to work to support her family and also her mom and her sister at this point. So she
Right.
talks about working just like a man, using a machete and other tools, and becomes very self-sufficient. It's at this time that she rediscovers the power of the mushrooms, particularly when her sister gets sick, Maria Anna, I believe. And her sister gets really sick and is expected by all accounts to die. They work with all of the healers, medicine people in the town, and nobody can cure
Curanderos.
her.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And no one can cure her. But she decides to turn to the mushrooms because she's desperate, because she's super close with her sister and it's like everything to her. And so she says, I'm just going to read this is from the autobiography. I'm going to read this quote because it's just I just like the way that she says it, or I guess the way that the translated version of the translated version says it. When the children were working inside my body, and she said that she gave her sister, I forget how many, she gave her sister like a pretty hefty dose, and she took like 10 times as much.
Oh my gosh.
So she would always take the mushrooms and give the other person mushrooms, and she always takes more. And with her sister, she just took a ton, just to like get all of the power that she could. And yeah, so I think that's an interesting visual too. But she says, when the children were working inside my body, I prayed and asked God to help me cure Maria Anna. Little by little, I felt that I could speak with more and more facility, not faculty. Facility. I went close to the sick woman. The saint children guided my hands to press her hips. Softly, I massaged her where she said it hurt. I spoke and sang. I felt that I sang beautifully. I said what those children obliged me to say. I went on pressing my sister and her stomach and her hips. Finally, a lot of blood came out. Water and blood as if she were giving birth. I didn't get frightened because I knew that the little one who springs forth was curing her through me. Those saint children gave me advice, and I carried it out. I attended my sister until the bleeding stopped. Afterward, she left groaning and slept. My mother sat down next to her and attended her. And after this healing happened, she goes and sits alone to kind of decompress because she feels confident that her sister's okay. And she has this insane vision where she meets figures that she calls the principal ones. And they give her a book of wisdom. And she can't read, she can't write, but she received it and it opens to her and she's just all giddy and she just knows that this is her calling. So she receives it and opens it, and all of the information in the book
Just goes into her?
Knows. And she just knows at this point that she is a healer who will work with the little saints for the rest of her life. She says, sometimes later I knew that the mushrooms were like God, that they gave wisdom, that they cured illnesses, and that our people since a long time ago had eaten them, that they had the power, that they were the blood of Christ. Super interesting.
Yeah.
That is something that I was going to reference a little earlier.
The fact that she talked about Christ.
Because something that, as we'll see later, Americans don't understand about her and their culture is the Christianity. That it was a largely Christian, pagan culture. And I think it's important to talk about because I think it's like intentionally left out to paint these cultures as like some sort of like primitive, ancient culture. And ignoring the fact, not that Christianity makes you more advanced, but it makes it more relatable maybe to our culture. And it seems that has been intentionally left out in a lot of places. Perhaps for that reason, to just make it seem more.
Well, there is especially during the Mexican Revolution, and especially with like curanderos, and especially with indigenous, there was a push by Porfirio Diaz, or Mexican, government, to make it seem like indigenous were just superstitious and not evolved.
Mm-hmm.
And so not again, like I agree with you.
Christianity
Doesn't make you evolved,
but it puts that in a paradigm where Christianity is the religion of the evolved cultures,
the progressive cultures,
right?
Which is bullshit,
right? It does give it that that I think maybe just that immediate respect.
Well, it makes it like it when I think about like cultures, the culture here in the United States, in some areas where there's a lot of racism, it helps to perpetuate the racism, and it helps to continue to keep this divide between two different people of color and people who are not of color. That's what the powers that be want. And so any sort of crossover that is going to make them seem like they have something in common, and in particular religion, of course they're going to try to leave it out. The proverbial they.
Upstairs.
Yeah, the men upstairs.
Yes,
Yeah.
Well said. Yeah, that's exactly correct. But the Christianity side of her was extremely important because the little saints, she worked with saints.
I also think, I'm sorry, really fast, sorry to interrupt you again, but I also think that like, from everything that we have learned and are learning in our master's program, Christianity itself has changed
So much.
a lot. The Trinity doesn't necessarily in some places and cultures, and when I say places, I mean like places in time, temporally. It's not what we think of when we think of what,
right. It's not what we think.
Yeah.
What we think it is. Which I guess I should preface too. To me, I'm already like so like there, but you're right that's something that needs to be talked about more. Like when she says the blood of Christ, they were the blood of Christ. When I think of Christ, I think of the like Christ consciousness, like this middle ground between us and divine, not necessarily in a single person, but this like symbol of
birth, death, rebirth.
Yeah, this connection to divinity. It's like we have this so for the mushrooms to be the blood of Christ, and what she's saying, it makes sense that if Christ is a symbol of like the bridge between us and the divine, the mushrooms are that bridge. Right. They do act as the bridge between us and the divine. And it's more of like a state of consciousness, a state of awareness than a single person.
For listeners, I highly recommend just looking into the history of Christianity. Highly recommend, because when we hear that word now, it elicits all kinds of reactions in people, and I think that learning the history is so important. Please read.
Yeah, also read the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospels, looking at Neoplatonism, looking at Hermeticism. Anyway, I digress.
I know. And we could go on and on, but we're not going to do that.
So she was Christian, and also Mazatec, just like their own Mazatec cultural religion, spiritual practices, which is, I guess, would be considered pagan in the way that they just believed that everything was divine and had like this life essence. And she says about the mushrooms, at bottom, I feel they are my family, as if they were my parents, my blood. In truth, I was born with my destiny to be a wise woman, to be a daughter of the saint children. So this is where that quote was a big reason why I was confused about her birth chart. Because daughter of the saint children, I'm looking down, Gemini, all of this.
Oh, in the fourth house.
In the fourth house.
Yeah.
So I really like that for the Pisces rising chart. But at the same time, and I feel it's my destiny, the moon in the first house, so closely conjunct the north node. in the second
yeah.
house. They're in different houses, different signs, but that would put them so close, and to have this strong sense of it's my destiny. But then again, with the Gemini rising chart, that puts her Chiron in Virgo in the fourth house, exactly opposite the moon in Pisces in the 10th house, conjunct the midheaven, which is also that I feel it's my destiny. And the Virgo Chiron is like massive healer.
Okay, I'm. You know how like we're supposed to give a hint for our next. Okay, I'm just gonna say this now so that everybody knows that this isn't anything that like I made up between now and our next episode. But I had a similar issue with my person and trying to figure out, because there were two charts, and I should have done what you did, which is to print both. But I finally just settled on one, but I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like there's different ways that it could actually fit for people. Yeah.
And without really being able to get to know her in a personal way. Not that I can get to know any of these people in a personal way, but at least like Anais, I could watch interviews with her and understand, and feel like I can relate to her. And it's so hard to feel like you can relate when it's like translating a language to a language. And also you see these videos and it's really just like this person's just like shoving a camera in her face, and she's not like performing or trying to be seen necessarily. She's just kind of doing her thing,
being herself,
and letting somebody be there. So yeah, I think I was leaning towards the Pisces rising chart.
Well, spiritual too. That transcendent spiritual.
Right. And I have a lot of Pisces risings in my life randomly, and it is a much more like passive energy. It's not as much of like, there are people who can generally get along with everyone. They're not trying to.
Really, that has not been my experience with Pisces. Well, there's one Pisces in particular I can think of, but I'm just gonna leave that one alone.
Interesting. I have both my parents actually are Pisces risings. And my brother's boyfriend is Pisces rising. And one of my good friends, Haley, shout out Haley, is a Pisces rising. So they're like a handful of Pisces risings that that I feel like generally they're just very easy to get along with, and they're very much like taking care of people. They're not the most aggressive with their own needs and wants. It's not that they're Has that not been your case?
Well, you know what? Maybe, okay, so, well, the person that I know is not a Pisces rising. They are a Pisces sun.
Oh, I think
different.
Okay. I think Pisces rising, because when you're looking at the rising, you're thinking about Virgo 7th house and Gemini 4th house, Sagittarius 10th house.
Yeah,
I think that's a
true.
completely
You're
different
right.
energy.
You're right.
Pisces suns, we could go on a whole other tangent about Pisces suns or Pisces moons. Like, it's a completely different feeling, I think. But she does have a Pisces moon, actually. But I think Pisces rising specifically, it has more of this, like, it's just not quite this, like, abrasive, I'm going to, like, push you away and hold this boundary. It's more of just like, it seems they're more of like an observer, I think.
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, the Gemini rising, I think is a little more vocal, which I don't know. Maybe she was.
Yeah. Well, and also the book thing. Yeah.
Anyway, okay. So the big thing with the saints that I wanted to bring up, because I love, she worked a lot with Saint Magdalene, Saint Mary Magdalene, and so I thought that was special. Yeah. And she believed that the saints...
That's a magic moment too.
I know. I think that's kind of why I went into the Mary direction.
Yeah.
She believed that the saints made up God the way every human makes up humanity. And so there wasn't one more powerful than the other, but she just worked with different ones for different.
I love that.
I never really thought
of it that way. Yeah. Wow, that's really cool. Yeah. All the saints making up... You said all the saints make up
God the way
that humans make humanity. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I love that.
Anyway, okay, I'm slowing down. We have quite a ways to go, so I'm gonna continue. she says, I only trust in what the children tell me. For me, that is sufficient. My only force is language, and all my language is in the book that was given to me. I am she who reads, the interpreter. That is my privilege. And she was saying this in comparison to the curers or the sorcerers who would perform magical rituals to bend reality to their will in her culture. So there were sorcerers and people that worked in these ways that she felt she didn't do that. She was working as like a channel directly with like the saints and with God's will to heal,
An interpreter.
Opposed to trying to manipulate for her own will.
Very interesting.
So she's healing for a while, and then another man comes along and bullies her into marrying him. And
a man being a bully?
Crazy.
Shocking.
And she finally agrees. Her mom convinces her. She's like, it would be nice to have a man around the house, help you out with some things, and this guy won't leave her alone. So she's like, okay, fine. She's like, I don't need him. I have my house full of my tools and my machete, and I'm super self-sufficient. But I guess she decides, who knows? Who's to say why she decides?
Right.
He ends up being an abusive alcoholic. And they have 6 kids together, 5 of which die. And he's...
Wow.
Yeah, he's cheating the whole time. He's doing nothing around the house. He's useless, worthless, not a good vibe. And eventually he dies because this story is... one of the women that he's cheating on her with, her sons band together and murder him. That's how he dies.
Wow.
Which I'm like, I don't want to say I love that story.
I do.
But I kind of love that story.
I love it when men come to the rescue of,
right?
And
I don't know why they killed him, but
because he was a motherfucker, maybe?
One can only speculate. So anyway, she's single again. She's widowed again. And this is the point when she's like, all right, no more men. I'm totally dedicating. Because I think it was also against custom, against tradition to practice healing or to work with the mushrooms if you're married. That's what I was reading. And so she didn't work with the mushrooms at all during that marriage. So when he's gone, she's like... back into it, finding my purpose again.
That is interesting.
Fast forward some years later to 1955, and we have over in America R. Gordon Wasson, who is the vice president of PR for J.P. Morgan Bank.
What?
Random.
This is crazy. This is going in a whole direction that I was not expecting.
He also just has a random interest and passion for ethnomycology. So he's heard of godlike mushrooms, divine mushrooms that indigenous cultures use. He's never witnessed them, but he's on a quest to find them. He's been all over. He's specifically interested in the Spanish missionary accounts of the Aztec mushroom ceremony of eating the Teonanacatl or God's flesh. Teonanacatl. I'm totally...
Teonanacatl.
Yes. Just listen to Coco. Which meant God's flesh. And he made several trips to Mexico in search of these and couldn't find anything that was similar until 1955. He visits the Oaxacan village of Huautla de Jimenez.
Oaxacan village?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Where
of where?
Of Huautla de Jimenez, where Maria lives.
Can I just see really fast?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Okay, wait. Where is it? Oaxacan village. Oh, Huautla de Jimenez. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Just want to see.
That's where Maria lives. And so he visits and he goes to the town official and says, do you have any of this that matches these stories, the divine mushroom? And the official says, nothing could be easier. And takes him to a mountainside, to this mud hut where mushrooms grow in abundance, and to the door of Maria Sabina. And this is where things get a little cloudy, because most stories just say, yeah, she was hesitant because she'd never done a ritual with foreigners before, and she'd also only ever done rituals for healing. That wasn't really his intention. But she agreed. And I think what was probably more likely, she was hesitant, but that she agreed.
Okay.
And that's kind of where the story ends. I think what was probably more likely is she didn't have much of a choice. And Sarah Lisa made it sound like she was harassed quite a bit and really pressured into
a white
this.
man pressuring an indigenous woman to do something they don't want to do. Yeah,
it's not a crazy idea.
No.
I also wonder about the town official and
especially someone who's like associated with J.P. Morgan of all.
Right. I wonder about the town official too, and if there was any sort of like incentive to like get the town official to convince her, like if he was getting.
Well, during the time they're trying to modernize Mexico as well, you know, like the Diaz Porfirio. Well, not in 1955, but you know that was one of the you know pushes for.
Interesting.
But sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I it's hard to find like the actual story. But I imagine it was a bit more complicated than this. She eventually does give in, and she has her first velada, which is a healing ceremony.
Oh, velada.
With the foreigners. And again, this is weird for her because she usually just works with the mushrooms for healing the sick, the physically sick.
But they just wanted to have an experience.
They just wanted to find God is what he was looking for.
Okay.
Which I think for her would be like, what do you mean you want to find God? Like,
yeah. Look around.
But she says okay, and in today's money, he ended up paying her the equivalent of $10 for sharing her ancient wisdom total that for everything. Wow. He goes back super excited about this, and he writes an article in Life magazine, or he gets an article published in Life magazine. And at first he hides her name and her location, but he has all these pictures of her and he writes about his whole experience. And I forget the name of the article, but it's something like Discovering the Magic Mushroom or something. And this is in 1957, I believe. And I have the charts for that as well.
Oh, okay.
So he publishes this, and then he goes back and he keeps working with her, and he publishes a second one where he publishes her actual name and where she lives.
So he doxed her.
And the response to this is so many people begin flooding. I mean, this is right before the 60s. So for the rest of her life, her village is flooded by beatniks, hippies, and celebrities, including the likes of Bob Dylan and John Lennon. Scientists and seekers of all stripes flooded the village of Huautla de Jimenez after the Life article was published. So she turned few away, though she frequently expressed misgivings about introducing Wasan to the mushrooms.
Sarah's probably not going to show my face the whole time we're talking.
It's brutal. And
fucking Bob Dylan.
The publicity was true. Also, the publicity was disastrous for the Mazatec community, who blamed Sabina for bringing misfortune to the village and defiling the velada ritual. Sabina's house was burned down. The federales frequently raided her home, accusing her of selling drugs to foreigners, and the hippies would rent cabins in neighboring villages. Tourists would have bad trips and go raving naked through the town. So just totally disrespecting their entire community, their entire culture, and she's getting blamed for it. So her son is murdered from this. Her house is burned down. She's totally ostracized, and these people keep coming back. And she's not turning anybody away. For who's to say why?
Because she's a sweet, kind, compassionate person.
Or because of pressure, or because maybe there's other people in the town who are getting paid to help people find her. I don't know.
Well, I mean, so, you know, I'm third generation Mexican American. So like, you know, that's like my culture, and, my culture, from, my mom's side, which is the one that I'm the most familiar with, I see and I can feel the indigenous energy, and it is very open, kind, compassionate, caring, and above all connected to nature. And so I could understand why she wouldn't, it's just, I just don't think they have it in, I just don't think that, I mean, my mom doesn't have it in her, none of I have 11 aunts and uncles, none of them had it in them, my grandparents either, just the most kind, compassionate, caring, open, loving people in the world that I've ever met.
Yeah.
And I've traveled some, so
and unfortunately with the mindset of most Americans, it's take advantage of that, of something that is offered in such an open and free way.
Yeah,
and she wouldn't charge
take advantage
for
of it,
these.
even if it isn't offered in an open and free way. Just take it.
True, the colonial mindset. And she wouldn't really charge for these either, because she didn't believe that was
right.
good, that was correct to charge for healing services. So this is the transit chart for when this Life magazine article was released. That is for the Pisces rising chart. This is for the Gemini rising chart.
Okay. Oh, wow. This is amazing. Moon. Wait, is the outer wheel? Okay, the outer wheel is when it was published. Okay, yeah. So, well, I'm looking at, that conjunction, the moon and Uranus. Basically her world, is getting, flooded and bombarded with other people's,
Totally.
emotions or whatever.
And it's the moon conjunct the North Node, conjunct Uranus in Scorpio. So it's definitely in a way it is like North Node being fated, and this is her purpose and her calling, right? And we'll get into this, the complicated fact of she is a huge factor in why we have magic mushrooms.
And then also, this would be a square, right? Because there's no...
sorry, that's a trine.
Okay,
Wait.
okay. 1, 2, 3. Isn't...
With the Pisces and
Aquarius, actually. I was looking at the Chiron in Aquarius.
Oh, that is Aquarius.
Yeah.
My bad.
Yeah. With
yeah, you're right. That is a square.
Yeah, so there's a square from Chiron in Aquarius that is transiting with her natal Uranus. So it's like the healing aspect is chaotic and being disrupted. And then her world is being basically thrown into chaos and disruption. But I just think also the fact that Chiron is in Aquarius, not just one person, but a lot of people want to be healed by her. And then, sorry, go ahead, show me.
Oh, this one, the Gemini rising chart puts the sun and midheaven and Mercury all in her 12th house, which I think is fitting because it is all of these things that are hidden and previously unseen by society. They're just being totally
put out,
exposed.
Yeah. Yep.
I also think the Jupiter exactly conjunct her natal Chiron.
Oh, I saw that
Virgo.
too. Yeah, I saw that over here. That was another thing that I was looking at too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
anyway, so this article comes out and her village gets flooded and she's being abused and being blamed for all of the damage. It's also interesting because Wasan, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right either.
Who cares?
I care
Just
less
kidding.
about that one. He ends up working with the CIA, and this is not a conspiracy. This is a real thing because MK Ultra starts around this time.
Interesting.
So the CIA.
Sorry, really fast. Uranus also conjunct her sun too.
Yes.
Everything, chaos, disruption.
Right.
Yeah.
Completely changing her reality.
Yep.
Shaking up the norm.
Yeah.
The CIA though ends up funding Gordon's trips to Maria because they're trying to see if
Good old USA.
these can be used for mind control. So that's interesting as well.
I'm sorry if I sound so cynical and angry. It's just infuriating. It's infuriating.
I think that's the appropriate reaction to
Okay.
this story. And I think the other stories, many stories don't fully go into the tragedy of it as much. It's just like, mother of magic mushrooms, thank you. And well, she says in her autobiography, before Wasson, nobody took the mushrooms only to find God. They were always taken for the sick to get well. Before Wasson, I felt that the saint children elevated me. I don't feel that anymore. The force has diminished. If Cayetano, the town official, hadn't brought the foreigners, the saint children would have kept their power. From the moment the foreigners arrived, the saint children lost their purity. They lost their force. The foreigners spoiled them. From now on, they won't be any good. There's no remedy for it.
That is so incredibly sad.
Yeah. And yeah, I think it's interesting because the way that we, I think, largely think of these mushrooms now in America and in our culture is to find God or to have some kind of fun divine experience, when she's literally working with them
To heal people.
And it's like they're giving her these gifts of like language. And so when she's talking about they won't be any good, there's no remedy for it, it's so interesting and sad to think of what that connection was like. And they're still, even with that gone, they still have such an incredible power and gift.
Yeah. So imagine what it used to be.
Yeah, imagine what it used to be, and imagine if we could have just respected. And Wasson will say, this is, he's remarked, he's responded to this. Actually, I wrote it down.
Is he still alive?
I'm not sure. I don't think so, because that was in the 50s and he was an adult.
Okay. I'm not going to go hunt you down or anything. Don't worry.
He says, these words make me wince. I, Gordon Wasson, am held responsible for the end of a religious practice in Mesoamerica that goes back far for a millennia. I fear she spoke the truth. At the time of my first velada with María Sabina in 1955, I had to make a choice: suppress my experience or resolve to present it worthily to the world. There was never a doubt in my mind. The sacred mushrooms and the religious feeling concentrated in them through the Sierras of southern Mexico had to be made known to the world, and worthily so, at whatever cost to me personally. If I did not do this, consulting the mushroom would go on for a few years longer, but its extinction was inevitable. So that is his justification.
Wow. Okay. At first I was like, oh, that's nice. He's actually admitting it. But then he doubles down at the end.
Yeah, he's like admitting it, and he's seeming kind of sad, but he's like, well, thanks to me, this would have been lost forever. And it's interesting because this is the world we live in. And so in the world we live in, because of his exploitation, we have magic mushrooms. Would that have been different if he hadn't done that? Would we have... There's just no way to know.
Right. Right.
And I'm grateful for this plant medicine. And I think it is really powerful. And I think that there's a way to be in relationship with it. But I think the way that especially the relationship to it in the 60s, where people were just totally disrespecting, not even intentionally so, just there's no awareness.
Right.
Largely because of our cultural paradigm of not viewing the world as divine inherently, as viewing it's like we live in this colonial this patriarchal mindset of like it's us versus everything else, like it's us here to survive and to take everything on that we see around us, and everything on this earth is for us to survive and to thrive. And so I think it's these people didn't have malintent, but they're just a product of this paradigm.
You know, one of my favorite sayings, and I never knew what this meant until I was in some really awful relationships with some really awful people, and it's I didn't mean to. I didn't have that
Right.
intention, and then it made me understand what the path to the path to hell is paved with good
Right.
intentions means. It's like, okay, fine, you didn't have bad intentions. What were your fucking
Right.
intentions then?
Did you have intentions at all?
Yeah, what were your fucking intentions?
Maybe, yeah, it's true. The lack of intention. Also, there's another quote along along these lines that is really resonant. Reality lies on the tip of our intention. And I think the point of that one is most of the time we're actually incredibly unaware of what our actual intention is. And so everything that we're doing is based on some kind of intention that we have in the moment.
Right.
And everything we're perceiving. And so that's another thing about our paradigm and our culture is that we also, it's not regular to think about, to be intentional. It's just
Right.
not normal to be intentional.
Just do what I want to do when I want to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's so much to unpack there and such a deeper conversation. And is it that we shouldn't use this plant medicine at all? Personally, I don't think that that's the solution, but I think that there needs to be.
Yeah, I'm not so much like, I mean, I think that eventually at some point in time it was going to be inevitable for people to discover magic mushrooms. But what irritates me and what infuriates me actually is men from this culture on this land that shouldn't be here in the first fucking place, excuse my language, but going into this woman's village and ruining her life for what?
Not only her life, but largely a lot of, her family, her lineage,
her reputation,
everything.
And it's sorry. Okay, I'm gonna calm down, but go on.
I love talking with you about this because this is how I was feeling researching this, and I think this is the response her story deserves, as opposed to the romanticized, like, of course lift her up, but it's not a happy story.
No,
like it's not one of thank God for Maria. It's one of sorry Maria. Yeah. So I guess to kind of wrap things up here a little bit, she obviously had a massive impact on the psychedelic movement in America. It's around this time in the 60s, psilocybin and LSD, and it's from this that we get massive artistic revolutions like the Beatles and so many revolutionary works of art, movements like the free love movement, everything, like so many crazy things that largely stem from the exploitation of Maria.
I'm sorry. I'm just like, what, like, okay, the Beatles. I'm sorry. Like, just, I don't know.
You're right. I'm just saying these largely, like, these things that define our culture. Yeah. And I'm not saying that that's a good thing. That
oh no, I didn't think that you were at all, but I'm just like, it's just more like my own internal dialogue that I'm having, where it's like, who gives a fuck about the Beatles? Sorry, but who does?
A lot of people.
I
know,
I know, but why?
No, I hear you. And like when it, like in comparison to what at what cost?
Right. That's what I mean. I'm not saying that the Beatles aren't good musicians, because they are, and they're a really tight band, and they played and they made some really cool songs.
It's beyond the music. It's the cultural impact. It's like the entire cultural paradigm that we have now has formed. A huge part of it formed in the 60s, and a lot of that is from this experience. And I think it's just important to be able to recognize just, I guess, that the tragedy that comes from that we don't think about. Like, we just don't consider the implications.
I think some people don't think about it, because I think for sure people like Coco and I, we cannot not think about it.
Exactly. I can't
can
not.
Can you repeat that so people?
So yeah, I would like Sierra to come and say what she has to say. Actually, for a second, come on over, because I agree with you 100%. You know I do. Okay, go ahead. Say your thing.
Okay, I think that for some people, they have been allowed, because of what they stole, to not think about the implications of like what so many of us who descend from enslavement or colonization or extreme poverty in this country, like, have not ever been able to look away from. Like, we can't, people like Coco and I who descend from these dark parts of American history, we don't get to live life every day without that vision and like without knowing how much was taken from us so that white affluent folks could thrive.
Could have the Beatles.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So the
Or
60s,
Bob Dylan.
yeah, the 60s is, yeah, I understand for like America, like there's a one side of my family where the Beatles were really impactful for them. But then you have to think about at the same time, like what was happening to other communities as they were taking practices or, you know, the sitar from India so that they could do all these things. And they were making millions of dollars and everybody else was not. I mean, rock and roll, which is greatly the movement that we're talking about, that's taken from the Black community, which stems from slavery, which is like when we came over in slavery, in enslavement, music and dancing was the only way they could communicate because there were tribes that were taken from each other that they didn't know how to communicate. So all of these things, like, yes, they're beautiful and they do create a culture.
Right.
But it's not American culture.
Right. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, thank you.
Yeah. I'm
Extremely
actually,
well said.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming over and speaking because I was feeling so angry that I wasn't able to be articulate for a moment there. So thank you. Yes,
No,
exactly.
You're absolutely right about that, and it is that that embedded American colonial mindset that it seems to be in especially white Americans' DNA to just exist as a product of other cultures without thinking about the implications and without thinking about the harm.
Right. And not to give you know, that culture an out in any way, but there are some powers at play that make it so that people who are a part of that culture don't ever understand or get to know these stories.
It's like a self-defending.
Well, no, I think that there are some powers that be called the elite who want to make sure that it stays, wants to make sure that people who look like, you know, my husband are never told stories like this, who never hear these stories. And as a matter of fact, when I'm, you know, doing research for some of the people that I do research for, the stories are very sparse. So when you were telling me about how you had talked to Sara Lisa and Estrella, I was like, thank you. I am so glad that there are, you know, people who are trying to raise these voices and tell the actual story about them so that, you know, people who do look like my husband will hear it and be like, wow, I had no fucking idea that this is what was going on.
Right.
You know? And because I don't think that I don't think that white people are inherently bad. I think that there's just there are powers at play that try to keep everyone where they're at.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So not to give you guys an out or anything.
Not taking that as an out. There's a lot of work, and I think that these kinds of stories are an important part of it.
Yes. And thank you for
thank you. Actually. Okay, yeah. Thank you both for that. I think that was a really important side quest that needed to be in this. And I did make room for that in my outline. I was like, I feel like there needs to be a conversation in this, touching on that. There's a quote from To the Best of Our Knowledge podcast, which I think was probably the best resource I found on her story. They have a whole part of their podcast that says, is it possible to decolonialize plant medicine? And they just have a whole dialogue about it.
Oh,
and cool. In that, They say, it's not just the history of one woman and how she suffered. It's about the unintended or unthinking exploitation of one culture by another. The hippies who made the trek to María Sabina's village didn't mean to do any damage. They just wanted a mind-blowing experience and were willing to ignore the socioeconomic and inequities to get it.
There's that didn't have bad intentions.
Totally. And that's a bad intention in and of itself.
Exactly.
Is to just not have an intention.
That's what people don't understand, is that to say, like, it wasn't, we didn't mean
have
to.
bad intentions, but did you have good intentions?
It's, yeah, go on. I'll just repeat what you say. Go ahead.
It's the impact that colonialism has had on white people that, I mean, even the people who benefit need to escape it.
Even the people who benefit from the culture need to escape it. That's a very good.
Seeking to escape it
There's
because it's harming them too. They just don't have the language to say it.
they're seeking to escape it, but they just don't have the language to
say that they need out.
that they need out. Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point.
That is a good point.
Yeah.
That is what they are seeking in it. You're right. You're right.
Yeah. That actually, yeah, you just opened my mind even more, Sierra. Thank you for saying that, because I never thought of it that way. I never thought of it that, like, you know, this culture is so toxic that even the people who it was made for are trying to get out of it, but they just don't even realize that that's what they're trying to do. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah, there's more quotes here, but I think you guys have pretty much touched on that. Anything else that I would say with this? And yeah, I guess the only thing left to talk about is her death, and it's not any better.
God.
She lives to November 22nd, 1985, and dies at 91 years old. So she's pretty old, but she dies of malnutrition and is destitute and impoverished and on the outskirts.
I have to say, and I'm just going to bring this up. We do a ritual before every podcast, and now I understand. Why. Like, I feel like she did give you her blessing to talk about her story.
I was quite nervous about it. Yeah, because pulling up, I was like, "Fuck! I didn't ask if I could tell her story," and I'm just talking about the story of taking things from her without permission her whole life. And now here I am with my outline in hand, already going to tell her story before I asked her for her permission.
But she gave you her blessing.
And we did a little card pull before, and the first one that immediately jumped out was blessing card. And so it felt very like, okay.
Yes. I think that she would approve. Coming from someone who comes from that's my background, that's my culture. Okay. I think she would say, "No te preocupes, niña."
Thank you. I don't know what that means, but
don't worry about it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so it's extremely sad she dies, and I think the saddest part is, to the best of my knowledge, her descendants are still impoverished. Her legacy has not. I didn't do too much research with this, so I could be wrong here, but in the most recent thing I saw of, like, her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren, they are still living in mud huts, and they haven't received anything for the incredible contribution that they didn't choose to make to.
They might also still be choosing to live with their culture and the way that they want to live. Yeah.
And not that they need to change that, or like, but yeah, I don't know. It seems like money maybe could be something
evil.
But yeah, I think money is seen as evil. I mean, she talked about money being evil. Mm-hmm. So, but that's interesting as well. Hopefully they're not getting bothered as much, but I kind of doubt that they aren't, especially if mushrooms grow there in such an abundant way.
And I said, "Can we move there, honey?" Never mind. Let me back that up. I wasn't being intentional. The white side of me came out right there.
Hilarious. But I'll leave us with a quote from her. One of her poems.
Yes,
that was
please.
Recorded, again, translated to Spanish and translated to English. But she says, "I am a woman who looks into the inside of things. says, I am a woman of light, says, I am the morning star woman, says, I am the woman of great expanse of the waters, says, because I can go up to heaven, says, because I can go over the expanse of the divine sea, says, calmly says, without mishap, says, with sap, says, with dew, says.
That's beautiful. Thank you for ending on that note, because I think that like just thinking about, I could get angry just my husband can tell you like how often I get angry about this stuff, but I think it's also very important to like hear her voice and hear what she had inside of her, which sounds like a bright shining light.
Which Leo sun?
Oh yeah,
essentially.
Leo sun. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, in conclusion, her true story and the depths of its tragedy may never fully come to light in our language. We know that she was powerful, strong, incredibly resilient, and completely devoted to the little saints and the healing work they accomplished together up to the very end. We know she was world famous and beloved, and yet died alone, malnourished, and impoverished, and on the outskirts of her community, with her family still never receiving any compensation for her tremendous impact. Her story begs to bring a light to the shadow side of plant medicines, the part of the lineage that we've conveniently forgotten. We've being, I guess, in our conversation, not all of us. A lot of us have conveniently forgotten, and the ways in which these practices can be harmful, not only to the cultures and the people that have been abused and exploited to get them, but to ourselves by not understanding the full extent of the spiritual connection they possess. I think that there's a much larger conversation that needs to happen in this regard, and I hope that this interpretation of the story can be a small step in that direction. But for now, with reverence, I'm honored to welcome María Sabina into our coven.
Bienvenida. Thank you. That was great. Thank you for choosing her.
It was a large one to undertake, and I was really nervous about it. So I'm glad that we did it, and I feel like that went well too. And
amazing.
I hope that people can talk about her in a, I don't know, in a way that isn't just, she's the mother of magic mushrooms, because also she wasn't.
Right.
Had been in her DNA and in her culture for a millennia. Like, she was not the mother. She was just the one that happened to be exploited in such an extreme way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, adding her to our coven meeting room.
What is she doing?
Oh, what is she doing?
She's hanging out with who was your first person?
Alice.
Uh-huh. And
Sor
Juana?
Yeah, I could totally see her with Alice, listening to some of Alice's music.
Alice playing the harp. And then Sor Juana is there as well.
Yeah.
Probably chilling with her, like talking to her about Christianity.
True. True. Yeah. I bet Ana also would really love Maria. They probably.
Which Ana?
Ana Mendieta.
Oh, yeah.
Not Anais.
Oh, okay.
Your
I think Anais would probably
Anais, they'd all get along. Yeah. Honestly. They'd all like each other. Do you have any hints about your next person?
Yeah. My hint is that you and I have very similar charts, and it just keeps shocking me more and more how aligned our thinking is. Oh. That's all I'm gonna say.
Amazing. Okay, can't wait.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, thank you, Jenna. That was really, thank you for talking about María Sabina.
Well, thank you for being in dialogue with me and sharing the story with me.
And thank you, Sarah, too, for helping.
Yes, thank you,
yeah.
Sierra, for popping in on this. That was, I feel like, so necessary.
Yes. I was about to throw this fucking microphone across the room. And Sierra's like, let me come and talk. Okay, yes, please.
And thank you, listeners, for holding space.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Well, we'll see you
See you next time.
Next time. Bye-bye.